Benedict Arnold. What does a man do when the country he bled for refuses to acknowledge the bleeding? That was the quiet, corrosive question eating at Benedict Arnold long before the name became a synonym for treachery across a nation. Born in Norwich, Connecticut, in 1741, Arnold was one of only 2 children in his family to survive into adulthood. He grew up watching his father collapse into alcoholism and poverty. Whatever ambition drove him later in life, it was forged in that early, unforgiving fire. When the Revolutionary War ignited, Arnold threw himself into the fight with uncommon ferocity. He helped seize Fort Ticonderoga from the British in 1775. He nearly died in Quebec. At Saratoga in 1777, he led a charge so reckless and decisive it arguably saved American independence, taking a bullet to the leg in the process. Congress responded by promoting 5 officers of lesser rank above him. Despite this, Arnold continued to serve. Then the court-martial came, the mounting debts, the socializing with Philadelphia loyalists, and a young wife whispering possibilities into a wounded man's ear. By May of 1779, Arnold was secretly negotiating with British Major John Andre. His price for surrendering West Point was £20,000. The plot collapsed when Andre was captured in September of 1780. Arnold escaped. Andre hanged. George Washington wrote simply, "Arnold has betrayed me. Whom can we trust now?" Guy Fawkes. What does it take for a man to decide that his own king must die? Not in anger, not in madness, but in cold, deliberate faith, with 36 barrels of gunpowder stacked beneath the feet of an entire government. On the 5th of November, 1605, Guy Fawkes crouched in a rented cellar directly below the English Parliament, hours away from igniting what would have been the most audacious political assassination in Western history. Fawkes was not born a radical. Raised Protestant in York, England, his conversion to Catholicism reshaped the entire trajectory of his life. Under King James I, English Catholics endured relentless persecution, fines, imprisonment, exclusion from public life. For Fawkes and a circle of 13 conspirators led by Robert Catesby, petitions and prayers had run dry. What remained? All they believed was fire. The gunpowder plot was meticulous. Barrels were smuggled. A cellar was secured. A date was fixed. But the plan unraveled through a single anonymous letter warning a Catholic lord to stay away from Parliament. Authorities searched the cellar. Fawkes was found, fuse in hand, in the early hours before dawn. Torture broke his silence. He revealed his co-conspirators and was tried for high treason. On the 31st of January, 1606, Guy Fawkes was executed. The fire he planned never came, but its shadow never left. Ethel Rosenberg. She had once dreamed of singing on stage at Carnegie Hall. She had actually performed there as a member of a choral group in her youth. That detail rarely makes it into the history books. What does is the electric chair. Ethel Greenglass was born on September 28, 1915, to Russian Jewish immigrants on New York's Lower East Side. She was bright, artistically gifted, and politically restless. She joined the Young Communist League, where she met Julius Rosenberg in 1936, and the two married 3 years later. Julius had, by 1942, embedded himself in a Soviet espionage network, feeding classified information to the USSR. He eventually recruited Ethel's younger brother, David Greenglass, a machinist stationed at the Los Alamos laboratory, odds where America's atomic bomb was being secretly developed. When arrests began unraveling the spy ring in 1950, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover made a calculated decision. Ethel would be charged not because the evidence against her was strong, but because her imprisonment might break Julius. It did not. David Greenglass testified that Ethel had typed up his handwritten nuclear notes. In 1996, he admitted he had lied under oath to protect his own wife from prosecution. The Rosenbergs refused to confess. 9 appeals failed. On June 19, 1953, Ethel was executed by electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Her brother walked free after 15 years. She was 37 years old. Mir Jafar commanded an army of 50,000 men. His enemy had barely 3,000. On the morning of the 23rd of June, 1757, the plains of Plassey should have witnessed the swift destruction of a foreign trading company overreaching itself on Indian soil. Instead, Mir Jafar, commander-in-chief of Bengal's forces, stood his troops down and watched in silence. He had already chosen his side. Mir Jafar was not an outsider or a rebel. He was a decorated general who had served Bengal's court for decades. But resentment is a slow poison, and Jafar's had been brewing since Nawab Siraj-ud-Dowlah sidelined him in favor of rivals. When Robert Clive of the British East India Company came offering a throne, Jafar accepted. The agreement was smuggled into his household in secret. In exchange for neutrality during battle, he would be installed as the new Nawab of Bengal. The battle itself lasted hours. Jafar's forces, resplendent with banners and armor, held their positions throughout. Weapons never raised, allegiance quietly transferred. Siraj-ud-Dowlah fled on camelback and was later captured, then executed on the 2nd of July, 1757, on orders traced back to Jafar's own son. Jafar ascended the throne he had purchased with his country's sovereignty. Yet the British demands were boundless. Bengal's treasury was drained. By 1760, he was deposed. He died on the 5th of February, 1765, neither conqueror nor king. In India, his name endures not as a title, but as a warning. To call someone a Mir Jafar is to call them a traitor to their own people. Vidkun Quisling, some men arrive at treachery through desperation, others through ideology. But Vidkun Quisling arrived there through ambition, neatly dressed, quietly calculated, and wholly convinced that he was saving his country by surrendering it. Born on the 18th of July, 1887 in Fyresdal, southern Norway, Quisling was, by every early measure, a man of remarkable promise. He graduated from the Norwegian Military Academy with the highest marks in its history, earned a private audience with the king, and later organized humanitarian relief during the Russian famine of 1921. What drives a man of such standing to discard it all? The answer, as with so many betrayals, begins with resentment and ends with ruin. By the 1930s, Quisling's political party, National Samling, could barely summon 2% of the Norwegian vote. His ideology was rejected. His leadership dismissed. In December 1939, he traveled to Berlin and met personally with Adolf Hitler, urging a German occupation of his own country. Months later, on the 9th of April, 1940, as German forces invaded Norway, Quisling commandeered national radio and declared himself head of government, the first attempted coup by radio broadcast in history. Norwegian resistance and German indifference collapsed his seizure within 6 days. He was reinstated as minister-president on the 1st of February, 1942. Under his administration, nearly 800 Norwegian Jews were deported to concentration camps in occupied Poland. Most were killed. On the 24th of October, 1945, Quisling faced a firing squad at Akershus Fortress, Oslo. His name outlived him differently than he imagined, not as a leader, but as a dictionary entry. In English and Scandinavian languages alike, a Quisling simply means a traitor. Aldrich Ames. Some men betray their country for ideology. Some for blackmail, some out of fear. Aldrich Ames did it for a Jaguar, a $500,000 house, and the expensive tastes of a woman he was desperate to impress. That is not a dramatic oversimplification. That is what he told investigators himself. Born in River Falls, Wisconsin on May 26, 1941, Ames grew up in the corridors of American intelligence. His father worked for the CIA, and Ames followed that path, joining the agency as a trainee in 1962. By 1983, he was head of Soviet counterintelligence operations in New York, a position that gave him access to the most sensitive human assets the United States possessed inside the Soviet Union. He drank heavily. His career evaluations were poor. His first marriage had collapsed under a mountain of debt. On April 16, 1985, carrying nothing more conspicuous than paranoia and financial desperation, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and offered names in exchange for $50,000. What he handed over that afternoon, and in the months that followed, was the complete roster of CIA agents operating inside the USSR. At least 10 of those men were arrested and executed. The agency lost virtually every active source it had in Moscow. By the time the FBI arrested him on February 21, 1994, the KGB had paid Ames more than $2.7 million. He is serving life without parole. Philippe Pétain. He was France's greatest soldier, and then he became something else entirely. In the summer of 1940, with German forces occupying the northern half of France and 2 million French soldiers held in prisoner-of-war camps, Philippe Pétain did not rally his broken country. He surrendered it, and then, remarkably, he governed what remained. Pétain was not an obscure figure pulled from the margins of history. He was the celebrated Marshal of France, revered as the defender of Verdun in the First World War, the man who had held the line when nothing else could. His country trusted him the way a wounded soldier trusts a surgeon. That trust became the instrument of betrayal. On the 22nd of June 1940, France signed an armistice with Nazi Germany. Pétain assumed control of the new Vichy government, which administered the unoccupied southern zone. The Republican motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, was replaced. Work, family, fatherland took its place. Parliament was dissolved. Democratic institutions were quietly dismantled. On the 4th of October 1940, Pétain signed laws authorizing the internment of foreign Jews in France, before Germany had even demanded it. In July 1942, his government coordinated the Veldiv roundup. Over 13,000 Jews, among them 4,000 children, were arrested by French police and held in a Paris cycling stadium before deportation to Nazi extermination camps. The order did not come from Berlin, it came from Vichy. Pétain was convicted of treason on the 15th of August 1945. He died in prison on the 23rd of July 1951. A nation had placed its survival in the hands of a hero. He handed it to the enemy. Robert Hanssen. He was the man the FBI trusted to hunt spies. He wore black suits to work, attended mass daily, raised 6 children, and coached his colleagues on detecting Soviet infiltration. For 22 years, he was also the spy they were hunting. Robert Philip Hanssen was born in Chicago, Illinois, on April 18, 1944, the son of a police officer who expressed love through humiliation. His father once rolled him inside a carpet as punishment. Psychiatrists who later spent over 100 hours examining Hanssen concluded that this early damage never healed. It calcified into a cold, private contempt for the institutions he served. He joined the FBI in 1976 and was assigned to counterintelligence, the one role that gave him an almost complete picture of America's intelligence architecture. In 1979, 3 years into his career, Hanssen walked into a Soviet intelligence front office in New York and volunteered his services. He gave the Soviets the identities of 3 KGB officers secretly working for the United States. All 3 were executed. He then stopped, resumed in 1985, stopped again in 1991, and restarted in 1999. Over the full course of his betrayal, he passed approximately 6,000 pages of classified documents covering nuclear war plans, surveillance technology, and double agents. The FBI paid $7 million to a former KGB operative just to identify him. He was arrested on February 18, 2001 at Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia, while placing classified documents at a dead drop. He died in prison on June 5. On to 2023. Wang Jingwei. In the shadow of a nation on its knees, a former revolutionary made a quiet, devastating choice. By the time Wang Jingwei boarded a plane from Chongqing in December 1938, the Japanese army had already seized Shanghai, Nanjing, and vast stretches of Chinese territory. His country was bleeding, and he had decided, calmly, deliberately, to stop fighting. Wang Jingwei was not a minor figure dragged from obscurity. He had been a close associate of Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of modern China, and was once widely regarded as his most natural successor. He had risked assassination for the revolutionary cause. What reshapes a man of that standing into a collaborator? The answer lies not in cowardice but in something far more dangerous, a conviction that he alone understood what China truly needed. On the 30th of March 1940, Wang established the reorganized national government in Japanese-occupied Nanjing. The regime flew the same flag as the legitimate government. It claimed the same revolutionary legacy, but its authority rested entirely on Japanese military occupation. Under his administration, forced labor, economic extraction, and suppression of dissent became instruments of governance. The population endured it under the name of peace. Wang died on the 10th of November 1944 in a Japanese hospital in Nagoya, never tried, never sentenced. His tomb back in Nanjing was later dynamited on the orders of Chiang Kai-shek. In China, his name became the word for traitor. It still is. Tomoya Kawakita. There is a particular kind of betrayal that defies easy comprehension, not the kind born of ideology or coercion, but one chosen with full awareness of what it means. Tomoya Kawakita was an American citizen. He knew it, and then he chose to forget it at the expense of men who could not. Born in Calexico, California in 1921 to Japanese immigrant parents, Kawakita held dual citizenship from birth. In 1939, at 18 years old, he traveled to Japan with his father to visit family. His father returned. Kawakita stayed to study at Meiji University, graduating in 1943 in commerce. When the Pacific War made return impossible, he registered in Japan's family census record, securing his Japanese identity, and obtained work as an interpreter at the Oyama Nickel Industry Company, then a mining facility that ran on American and Allied prisoner of war labor. What he did next was not the work of a confused young man caught between two nations. Former POWs, many of them survivors of the Bataan Death March, testified that Kawakita forced prisoners to beat each other, kicked them, made them run to exhaustion after shifts, and denied care to the injured. They called him the meatball. Over 100 veterans came forward to testify against him. In 1946, a former POW named William Bruce spotted Kawakita shopping at a department store in Los Angeles. He notified the FBI. In 1948, Kawakita was convicted of 8 counts of treason and sentenced to death, later commuted. He was deported to Japan by President Kennedy in 1963, never to return. Judas Iscariot. A kiss is, by nature, an act of warmth. It crosses the space between two people as a gesture of belonging, of closeness, of trust. So when Judas Iscariot pressed his lips to the cheek of Jesus of Nazareth in the Garden of Gethsemane, the armed men standing just behind him understood exactly what it meant. That signal, tender in form, lethal in function, remains the most recognizable act of betrayal the world has ever been given a name for. Judas was not a stranger pulled in from the street. He was one of 12. He had walked the same roads, shared the same meals, and witnessed the same miracles as the disciples who would later weep at what he did. He carried the group's money bag, a position of trust inside a circle built entirely on it. What fractures a man so thoroughly from the inside? The Gospel accounts record 30 pieces of silver as his price, a sum equivalent to roughly 4 months' wages for a common laborer. He approached the chief priests directly. The arrangement was deliberate. In the hours following the Last Supper, Judas led the temple guards through the darkness to where Jesus prayed. The kiss confirmed the target. Jesus was arrested, tried, and crucified. Judas returned the silver. It bought him nothing. According to the Gospel of Matthew, he died by his own hand shortly after. The field purchased with the returned coins was called Akeldama, the field of blood. The name endured. So did his. Jonathan Pollard. He was employed by the very country he was robbing. He sat in secure facilities, handled top-secret files, and was regularly commended by his superiors, all while funneling suitcases full of classified American intelligence to a foreign government. What does it take for a man to look his country in the eye every single morning and feel nothing? Jonathan J. Pollard was born on August 7, 1954, in Galveston, Texas, and grew up in South Bend, Indiana, where his father was a professor of microbiology at the University of Notre Dame. He graduated from Stanford University in 1976 and joined the U.S. Navy's intelligence apparatus in 1979, eventually becoming an analyst at the Anti-Terrorist Alert Center in Maryland. The position gave him access to classified material spanning the Departments of State, Defense and Justice, the CIA, and the National Security Agency. In June 1984, Pollard made contact with Israeli Air Force officer Avi Amsela and formally entered the service of LACAM, Israel's classified scientific intelligence bureau. Over the following 18 months, he delivered approximately 800 classified documents and an estimated 1,500 intelligence summaries. Among them was a 10-volume National Security Agency Signals Intelligence Manual revealing the full scope of America's global listening operations. Some of that material is believed to have reached the Soviet Union. On October 25, 1985, he was observed carrying a large bundle of files to his wife's car. On November 21, Aburshi FBI agents arrested him outside the Israeli embassy, where he had gone seeking asylum. In March 1987, he received a life sentence. He was paroled in 2015 and emigrated to Israel in December 2020. Larry Wu-Tai Chin, he was decorated by 2 governments, and he had betrayed one of them for decades before anyone noticed. In 1980, the CIA presented Larry Wu-Tai Chin with a medal for distinguished service. That same year, a parallel ceremony was being prepared for him in Beijing. He had earned both. He was loyal to neither country completely, only to the arrangement he had quietly constructed between them. Chin was born in Beijing on the 17th of August, 1922, and came to work for American forces as a translator during World War II. He was recruited as a mole for Chinese intelligence as early as 1948, while posted at the U.S. consulate in Shanghai. By 1952, he was inside the CIA's Foreign Broadcast Information Service. The door was open, and he walked through it for 37 years. What he passed across was staggering. During the Korean War, he relayed the names of Chinese prisoners of war who intended to defect, men who were then specifically requested back by China before armistice negotiations could proceed, delaying them by over a year. In 1970, he handed Beijing classified CIA documents revealing President Richard Nixon's secret plans to open diplomatic relations with China. Mao Zedong, forewarned, negotiated from a position of complete advantage. Qin was finally exposed in 1985 after a former Chinese spy chief defected to the United States and brought his file. Arrested on the 23rd of November, 1985, he was convicted on the 7th of February, 1986, was on 17 counts of espionage and tax evasion. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his cell, a garbage bag tied over his head with shoelaces. He had accumulated over $1 million from his espionage. He never served a single day of his sentence. Ali Pasha of Tepelena. In the mountains of southern Albania, where banditry and survival had long been the same thing, a boy named Ali Tepelena watched his father die in poverty, robbed of land and title by rivals who had outmaneuvered the family at court. That wound never closed. It became, instead, a blueprint. By the time Ali Pasha of Tepelena reached the height of his power, he had built an empire within an empire, and then he turned it against the very throne that had raised him. Born around 1740 in Tepelena, Ali rose from a family of minor Albanian beys with little more than a name and a grievance. His mother, Kamko, formed a brigand band after his father's death and lit in him a fire that never dimmed. Ali became its leader, raided mountain passes, accumulated wealth, and drew the attention of Ottoman authorities, who, rather than crush him, recruited him. By 1788, he was appointed Pasha of Iwanina. The empire had handed power to a man who would spend decades quietly undermining it. At his peak, Ali governed an expanse covering most of Albania, Epirus, Macedonia, and Thessaly, a domain so vast that England, France, and Russia sent separate diplomatic delegations directly to his court, bypassing Constantinople entirely. Lord Byron visited him in 1809 and was received in grandeur that rivaled any European court. Ali had become, in all but name, a sovereign, but Sultan Mahmud II was watching. In 1820, he declared Ali a rebel and dispatched an army. After 2 years of siege, Ali's sons abandoned him. His allies switched sides. And the walls of Ioannina fell. Lured out of his island fortress with false promises of pardon, he was shot through the floor of his room on the 5th of February, 1822. His severed head was sent to Constantinople and displayed at the gates of the Sublime Porte. He had spent a lifetime outmaneuvering everyone. In the end, he was outmaneuvered by trust.